This episode of Kelly's YouTube channel is brought to you by COVID. We can give it to you for free, or we can give it to you if you pay me. That's over.
If you pay me, we'll send it in bottles.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you guys for your patience for this video. I'm sorry it wasn't able to go out on time. It's just we've had issues with snow, and so I couldn't get up here to film with Teresa, and I was sick, and all the excuses, laundry list of excuses, my dog ate my homework and all that good stuff. So we have a fantastic episode that we got. I was dying. I was losing it. Just for some context, I get up at 5 or 5:30. It was 5:30 this time, but usually previously it had been 5. I get up that early, I grab my phone, I don't leave my bed, the lights are off, I grab my phone, I turn on Wandavision, and I'm watching it in bed. And the day before, I had been really, really sick, and then I woke up after finally having slept, and it was like the cure was delivered right to my phone. A 22-minute Marvel movie
It is. It's a 22-minute Marvel movie.
Yes, just dropped to me right then.
So this episode was on the quality of the best of Marvel. It was so good.
Yes, the opening, let's just dive right into it. The opening scene where we get Monica Rambeau's backstory was amazing. But let's first just summarize where we're at, because we didn't actually do a sitcom episode this time. This is basically going back and giving some much needed information to the audience members who don't know what these stories are from the comics and what's actually going on. So this is really what the show was screaming for in the last episode, and so they finally gave it to us, and this was very, very important for plot development and for the information of the audience, so that we had an understanding of what's actually going on.
And I wouldn't say that it's not that it's the best episode in the series. It's like if you watch the first 3 episodes and then with this, it makes it all amazing.
It enhances the other 3 episodes. I think it's one of the best episodes of the show. However, it wouldn't be as good if we hadn't had all this build up prior to this. Why are you yawning while I'm talking? How rude. Rude. All right. So the opening scene was really what hooked me in. It was a great hook.
It shows the people coming back from being dusted in the quote-unquote blip. I do not like that they call it the blip. You didn't see Spider-Man Far From Home, and they didn't handle it well at all in that movie. They kind of made a joke of it, and they didn't really address how people are feeling, and all the convenient characters who had to be gone for 5 years came back, and so there was none of that. This actually shows some of the chaos of it initially. Yeah, and
if you even think about it, I did not watch that Spider-Man movie, and I kind of feel like I should, just to kind of catch myself up on things that were discussed in that movie, even if the movie wasn't that good. But the thing is, like, you think about it. Let's just think, a family member disappears for 5 years. What do? Well, for the first 2-3 years, you're probably, dealing with grieving and loss and all of that. And then finally, after all that time, you're starting to be like, okay, it's time to move on. So let's say spouses are starting to remarry and so on and so forth at this point. 2-3 years is usually kind of about the point when people are starting to be like, okay, well, maybe it's time to move on. I'm generalizing, obviously. There's certain people, look at me, I'm still upset about the loss of one of my cats. And how many years has it been? Almost 5. So, you just look at this. But anyway, I'm just being generalizing. But the realistic implications on real people's lives that the Thanos snap had was actually explored in a very tight, quick scenario here. And
we see everyone coming back to the hospitals. It brings up questions of like, okay, what about the patients that were near death?
Yeah.
Coming back to life in these hospitals.
And now they're dead. Or like the people that were sitting there with their loved ones. In the case of Monica Rambeau, she shows up and she's like, well, my mom was fine. And they're like, no, she died, but a couple years later, and you've been gone for even longer than she's been. So I thought that was really tastefully handled. But again, this episode was so tight in its development of both plot and character. I just really appreciated that. And this is what I've been dying for. And I've been screaming for it. You can watch all my old videos. Or all my previous videos where I've talked about, where I've talked about how one of the problems with movies today is that they have way too much time on their hands, and so they end up putting things in these movies that are just not useful or worthless or stupid or dumb, or they don't move the plot forward. And in these 22-minute shows and episodes, they have to cut everything crappy out and only put in the necessary information for the audience. And that's what I really love and appreciate. And Marvel did a great job in this episode. So we move on from the hospital scene, and we find that Monica is having to get reacclimated into her job, and she's actually working for SWORD. We also find out her mom was one of the founders of SWORD. And Reese, can you kind of explain just briefly what the background of SWORD is in the comics?
So SWORD is, I'm not going to say the acronym, but it's basically SHIELD. SHIELD failed in the Marvel Universe, but it's basically SHIELD in space. It responds to extraterrestrial threats and things like that. And it makes sense that it would be... It would be coming out and being funded more after S.H.I.E.L.D. fell and after they have more threats coming from space and all that. And we see it there's a brief scene at the end of Far From Home that reveals that Nick Fury is a part of it and that they now have a space station and all of that.
Yeah.
So it's established that SWORD is, and he was a part of that implied in Infinity War before he disappeared. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a new organization that's going to be dealing with like threats in the outer universe and stuff like that. So Monica is a captain there, and we hear that she basically grew up at SWORD after her mom was one of the people who founded it. And so they want her doing some ground duties after she's been disappeared for 5 years. And so they send her to what she thinks is a dull, dead case that... and Jimmy Woo from Ant-Man and the Wasp he has someone in the witness protection program who he was trying to contact, and he couldn't find. It was like they'd never even existed. So he goes to the town or the area they're supposed to be living in, and he finds out that the town, people don't think that the town exists, and he's talking to two sheriffs right outside the town, and they don't acknowledge that the town exists. Only he and Monica, who shows up, acknowledge that the town is there.
And we can all see that the town is there, but the sheriff and his deputy can't even see that the town is there. They're like, this place isn't even on the map. What are you guys even talking about?
And they suggest in the show, they say, can we see the town because we were far away enough from it, or is it because we don't have a personal connection to the town? So what's implied is that anyone with a personal connection to the town is going to have their mind erased from it.
So it's just interesting to me how they've given us so much background on Monica. We check that box. We get a little bit of background on Jimmy Woo that kind of the audience that hasn't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp needs. And we also find out how Monica, a.k.a. Geraldine, actually got into the town. She's the one who sends that drone in, that initial drone that Wanda ends up finding as a toy in the fantasy world. And Monica gets pulled in through the wall, and yeah, that's how she gets inside Wanda's fantasy world, and she basically is grafted in. She loses her memory, and she, just becomes a part of this town. And that's why in the third episode, her memory starts to get jogged with various things. Like when she hears the sound of the stork and she jumps and she sounds a little bit more like an adult rather than, the quirky...
A 70s caricature.
Yeah, a caricature of a 70s woman on TV. And then Wanda gives a reasonable explanation within the TV universe for what that sound is, and then she's pulled back into her fantasy and back into her character. But then when she mentions her brother, Monica gets pulled all the way back out and cannot, pull herself back into the fantasy world, which is why she must be ejected, and Wanda ejects her.
We'll talk that in a minute.
All right.
But, so we get, in the next scene, because Monica disappears and they don't want anybody else to go in there, they bring in the FBI, they bring in SWORD, they bring in astrophysicists, they bring artificial intelligence people, they bring in everyone, which, as Darcy from the Thor movies says, that means that they have absolutely no idea what they're dealing with, and they're just throwing all the clowns at it just to figure out if anything. But I was so disappointed when I heard that Darcy was going to be coming back, because I'm like, why would they bring that crappy character from Thor the Dark World, that's the last time we saw her, that nobody liked, back into this show? But she worked perfectly.
I loved her, and I've hated her in every movie I've seen her in from Marvel. I hated her in the first Thor, I hated her in the second Thor, and when I heard that she was going to be in here, I was like, oh great, this is a joke. She was the much needed comic relief and also the eyes and ears of the audience, because she and Jimmy Woo both represent us as the audience members trying to figure out what's going on the other side.
Universe created a sitcom starring 2 Avengers, and he's got his little whiteboard about all the theories that we have, like why the hexagon,
which is just like I've got my little notebook here filled with theories so that we can do these shows.
I thought that Darcy was perfect because of her connection to the Thor movies. She knows what she's doing in terms of things that no one understands.
Right.
She's weird enough to try different unconventional ways to try to figure it out, but she's also such a quirky, awkward, annoying person that she also can come off as an audience member who's just watching a sitcom.
Yeah.
So she just was perfect in it.
Yeah. And obviously she has, the actress has a background in sitcoms, and so it made sense for her to be tapped, as well as for the actress who plays Agnes. And I think the woman who plays Mrs. Hart also has a background in sitcoms and theater. So they really did do their research, and they pulled people that they thought would really lend themselves well to this specific show. So we find out at the end that, how Monica is ejected from the fantasy world. She goes from Geraldine back to Monica, and she reveals to everybody else there that it's actually Wanda that's the one that is controlling everything here. Because the entire episode, they're assuming that Wanda and Vision are somehow trapped or being manipulated, which, Wanda might be being manipulated, but that's another theory for another time. But the reality is Wanda's the one who is calling the shots, generally speaking. She's the one who decided that it was time for Monica to leave. She's the one who is, she shut off the radio when Jimmy Woo was trying to get in touch with her through the radio, which it was interesting to see how that came about, which we find out in this episode as well. She's the one who, while Vision was screaming, afraid in bed, she's the one, attacking the tree and whatnot. So it's just interesting that now the curtains are down. We know, well, we already knew, but the audience that didn't know understands that Wanda is the real kind of villain at this point of this TV show.
So we get a shock, though, and we get a Marvel jump scare. So
yes.
Wanda's guard has kind of
And just, I mean, we've spoiled a lot, and I'll put spoiler in the title, but this, if you
Major spoilers.
This point, it will ruin the episode if you haven't watched it already, so get out. Go ahead.
Like Monica, but anyway.
Yes.
So
it's time for you to leave.
Back in from the last episode, and it's like he's kind of weird blue or gray looking in the background. I was like, what? And Wanda.
Wait a minute. Set the scene again. So this is at the end. Monica has been ejected, and Vision comes back in through the door.
Yeah, well, Wanda, he's asking questions, and he kind of looks gray in the background, and he's just kind of faded. And Wanda is still talking like kind of the villainous Wanda voice, indicating that her guard is still let down from this sitcom world.
Yeah.
She turns around, and Vision is dead Vision. He's got his head smashed in like when Thanos killed him, and he's gray, but he's still talking like a dead puppet. Yeah. And then Wanda is shocked and looks away, and he's what?
The only thing missing was the soundtrack from Psycho. It's like she's parading his corpse around the house.
And then she lets her guard back up, and he goes back to normal. Now, there's 2 things. One, a lot of people think that she is just parading his corpse around and making him talk.
Theory. That's the theory that I want to be true. 2,
it is that her powers obviously are what's keeping him alive, and if she lets those powers down, then he's not going to be alive anymore.
Yeah. Now let me just interject here, because I don't think I mentioned this on either of our previous episode reviews, but I was talking to Teresa a couple days ago about, I rewatched the second episode and how Vision is, when they're in the magic show, their names are Illusion and Glamour, and he even says in his kind of drunken stupor, he says, "I'm an illusion."
Yes.
Yes, he is. So he already kind of revealed what he is, and he's just, literally Wanda's fantasy parading around, and it could be his dead corpse that she's using. I just think that's really fun.
Something else, some information we do have from the trailers.
I have a very dark sense of humor.
Some information we got from the trailers. We do hear Wanda say, "I have no idea how I got to this point." Mm-hmm. So there is still a bigger picture and where she is being manipulated and how she was thrown into this. And I do believe we'll get an episode explaining all that. Yeah. Which is going to blow my mind if this episode was so good. Because that episode is going to show me answers that I don't know. Because we see this episode is great, but I pretty much, we knew what was really going on because we read the comics and we read a lot about this show. So this is just giving us all that we knew was going to happen. The episode that explains how Wanda got to this point is going to give me things I have no idea. I don't have the answers to.
Although I have seen footage coming up that is definitely pulled from The Office.
Yes.
Where she's like talking into the directly into the camera, answering questions, and I'm going to die from that because it's such a more modern reference that we all can get, and that just is going to make me so happy. But what were some just to follow up on the whole end scene with Vision and everything? At the end, Vision is kind of freaking out a little bit. He's like, "We should leave. We should go," and she's like, "No, we can't." And the reason they can't is because if they leave, then Vision is dead again, and she's in the real world, and the fantasy is ruined. However, she also says to Vision, "I have everything under control." The problem is we've already seen that she doesn't have everything under control because she had to lose control in order to get rid of Monica. So, and she lost control by even allowing Monica to come in and be Geraldine. So, and she lost control when she was starting to talk about her brother and real world issues, which is what woke Monica up in the first place. So Wanda thinks that she has everything under control, but she clearly does not. So I just wanted to make that point there. What were some other Easter eggs, like the hexagon shaped map and all that kind of thing?
Shape. The town is in a hex shape. Hex being Wanda's powers again.
Yeah, and there's other people, our dad included, who have suggested that the hexagon being six-cornered is representative of the 6 Infinity Stones. I think that's a fair assessment. I just don't know. I really hope that they don't keep circling back to the Infinity Stones ad nauseum, because that was the entire story of the first 3 phases of Marvel. Let's move on. The Infinity Stones are destroyed. But if they're able to, bring them back in an interesting way and not just keep, milking that cow, I guess, or goat, I don't know, whatever animal, mammal, yeah, let's go outside and milk the Infinity Goat.
The Infinity Goat.
Anyway.
So, and we got another trailer that shows that Vision is continuing to kind of break through the reality.
Yeah.
And the questions that he asks, and
Vision is not content to continue this charade.
Even coming to the end and trying to break out of the bubble, so to speak.
Yeah, and so even at the end of this episode, Vision is kind of shown to be almost, I don't know, hypnotized or drugged by Wanda in some way, but eventually he's clearly catching on. He knows Wanda really well, and so he's not going to continue to fall for these tricks of hers. So it'll just be interesting to see how far he's willing to go. There's even a picture of them both kind of flying, and she's got power coming out of her hands, and he's
like there's an argument.
Yeah, like they're fighting, or they're in fighting positions or something in an upcoming episode, potentially even next week's episode. So that'll be interesting to see if they really start to become antagonistic toward each other towards the end of this episode or of this series. So just a couple other things I wanted to mention that were just like little things. The acting head of S.W.O.R.D. right now is kind of a jerk and is very unlikable. And usually when Marvel puts a character like that in, it means he's either going to get killed drastically or he's going to end up being an antagonist later on.
Yeah, I thought of that.
So I just wanted to drop that there, throw that out there. I don't have any other theories on that. Marvel just has its tropes that it does, and I'm already picking up on that with this guy. And then the witness that Jimmy Woo is looking for, that is the whole reason why Monica came down there to help him to find this guy. I'm theorizing it could be Herb, just because
they found out his name though, and they didn't emphasize it.
That's true. The other thing too is Phil is kind of a shifty character, and again, we're still looking for the Grim Reaper and Mephisto.
Well, we know Phil. The 2 people we do not know are Agnes and
Dottie.
And so that we have to keep our eyes
I think Dottie is like the leader of the Salem witches or something.
Yeah, for the children.
For the children. Yes. I just want to go back and reference how much I appreciated the time spent with the supporting cast in this episode, because we've spent now 3 full episodes with Wanda and Vision almost exclusively. We got some development with Dottie and with Agnes and with Mr. and Mrs. Hart and all them, but not to this level. And I appreciated that they had an episode that just developed Monica, who's very important and will be important in movies coming up in the future. We got time developed with Darcy, and we got time developed with Jimmy Woo, which I don't like him as a character. I think he's dumb, but I think
he worked here.
He did work here. I hated him, but it wasn't because he was a bad part of the story. I just hated his character because I hate his character. Anyway, And then the other thing is because we just watched the episode right before we recorded this video, I noticed in the background, right before Monica gets thrown through the wall at the end of this episode, that there's a piece of wall art that actually references, it's in the shape of the squares that Wanda's head explodes into at the beginning of the comic book House of M. And so I appreciated that little nod to the comic book, or that is one of the comic books that they based this show off of. And I thought that was really a nice little touch. It just goes back to the fact that they really took the time in this show to really work on the references and make it really tight. And it's like somebody actually cared about this project as opposed to a lot of other things that I've seen. Wonder Woman 1984. Like they cared about.
If you want to watch a woman parade her dead boyfriend around in a wish and a lie, watch this show. Don't watch Wonder Woman 1984.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to watch a modern day Psycho, it's perfect. I'm just waiting for Wanda to come down their staircase with a knife and a wig.
I just am glad that they are willing to go darker and more horrific elements, because that gives me hope for Doctor Strange 2. That's supposed to be a superhero / horror movie.
Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to that movie as well.
I haven't mentioned this, but the fact that they talk about how the energy that is around Wanda's town that she's created is all stuff that came from when the Earth was created, either says that it does have to do with the Infinity Stones, which we know her powers came from, or that this has to do with the mystic realm, which goes more into Doctor Strange, and that is stuff that Sword would not understand at all. So that's why you're going to have to get Doctor Strange in here.
Yeah, so it's just going to be very interesting to see where this goes in the future. I was so happy with this episode. I was definitely a little bit down after the third episode, just because it didn't feel like it had the development that I was looking for, and this episode really filled it out and gave it so many more layers that kind of the last episode was really just screaming for and definitely needed. So I am very much looking forward to the fifth episode, the fourth sitcom episode coming up next week, which will be the 80s. And I'm looking forward to whatever soundtrack they have in store for me, because I've just been loving the soundtrack so far. I have not even looked. They already have the soundtrack released on YouTube, and I won't even look at the names of the songs because there's too many spoilers in each song, because they reference things that are actually happening in the show. So like I said, I'm very excited. Therese is tired and yawning and wants to be done. So let me just wrap this up by saying, like this video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell to get notifications, comment below what you guys thought of this episode and which episode has been your favorite. I still think episode 2 was the best one of the sitcom episodes, but I think this episode was just so well-timed, placed, and the quality through the roof. This is like Marvel movie quality. I felt like I was in the theater on my cell phone. And let me just remind you guys all, waking up after having been so sick and just having that wonderful thing dropped on my phone was a wonderful experience. And I just deeply thank Marvel for giving me that wonderful experience. So thank you guys for watching this video, and I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Bye.